Kesubos Daf Samach Aleph has one Mishnah and contains three major sugyas before the Mishnah. That is the obligation that a woman has whether she needs to nurse or not. Then we'll talk about the obligations of a woman's chores in the home and whether she can release some of them when she has avadim, how many, why she needs to still do some if she has some avadim or shuvchos. And then we'll talk about other chores that she does even if she has a full complement of servants, some which are provided for a sense of endearment between the husband and the wife. Then the Gemara will talk about a person who has a certain craving that he needs to satisfy, not to come to the Sakana. There'll be a number of Agadata stories along the way and incidents that happened. The Gemara will then introduce the next Mishnah, which talks about a woman's obligation to provide conjugal rights to his wife. So let's begin. The Gemara talks about a woman's obligation to nurse the child. The Gemara says, what if there's a dispute between the husband and the wife, whether she should nurse or not? So first of all, simply as to whether the dispute is not based on social status, but it's based on whether or not she wants to nurse. So if she says she wants to nurse and he says she shouldn't, obviously he has no business answering her. She is in pain because of the milk that she has, and therefore she should nurse. If it's the other way around, the Gemara says, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says that Rav Huna asked this question as a test to Rav Huna Bar Chinina, or Rav Huna Bar Chinina asked it to Rav Huna, and this was the test. The Gemara doesn't say what the answer was, whether or not if she does not want to nurse, if he can force her to nurse. Now the Gemara talks about what if they're in different social strata. Now, generally a person on a higher social strata would not nurse, they would hire somebody to nurse. So the question is, a woman is on a high social status from her family, a man is on a high social status from his family, which is the one that wins the day? So the Gemara says, most definitely if she was on a high social status, she should not drop to his level and nurse. He cannot force her to nurse and say, I don't want to hire a wet nurse for you. If she was at a high level, she definitely has the right to a wet nurse, and he has to hire it for her. If he was on a high level and her family had the meaning to nurse, the Gemara asks the question, the Gemara answers that he also has to bring her up to his level and hire a wet nurse for her. Either way, the Gemara says she has to be brought up to the higher level of the two of them. She cannot be made to go to a lower level of the two, the higher of the two. How do you see that? So the Gemara says we have two sources from Psukim. One is it says Vehi Ba'ulas Baal, she is a husband of a man, so that's read as Ba'aliyasoy shel Baal. She gets lifted up, she gets raised to the level of the Baal, and not, she doesn't have to drop to the level of the Baal. So she goes up to her husband's status if it's higher, but not down to her husband's status if it's lower. Second pasuk is where it says about Chava Vihi Hasa Aim Kol Chai. She became married to Adam and she was the mother of all life. So Aim Kol Chai, she was there for life. She was not there for loss, not there for pain. Marriage is not supposed to bring her lower, it's supposed to bring her higher. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to the course of servants, which we've seen in our last Mishnah, that a woman has the 7 chores, and for each servant she brings in, she can do less and less chores until she brings 4, and she doesn't have to do any. So Gemara says, after she brings in one servant, why does she have to do any chores at all? If she was expected to do them all herself, so then she can expect the servant to do them all. So Gemara says, because now there are more chores, because there are 3 people to take care of, not just the 2 of them. So if the servant's going to take care of the chores of the servant plus the husband, who's going to take care of the chores of the wife? So therefore she has to do some things. So Gemara says, okay, so if she has 2 servants, so what's the problem now? She has all the chores taken care of, plus an extra one to take care of the chores of herself. So Gemara says, okay, but there are still additional chores. There are the chores for the guests and the passers by who visit the house. Somebody has to take care of them, so for that she has to do certain chores. So the Gemara says, okay, so if she has 3 servants, so she has to do less chores, but she still has to do some. So what's the reason for that? So the Gemara says, because when you have more people, you have more guests and passers-by, and therefore, then the fact that you have 3 servants, you're going to have a higher level. You still need chores that still have to be done, so she still has to do something. So then the Gemara says, so then why, if she has 4, doesn't she have to do anything? Versus 4 is different. 4, they find ways of splitting the tasks between them, so it all gets taken care of no matter how much work there is. Okay, says the Gemara, she doesn't have to actually hire the servants and bring them into his household. If she brings in enough of a dowry that now the estate can afford servants, that's enough. She no longer has to do the work, and if he wants it to get done, he should use the money to hire somebody. That's halacha seber of Chana, or possibly of Shmuel bar Nachmani. Gemara now brings a brisa that says even if she didn't bring it in as a dowry, but she saved her own money to be able to hire, that's enough as well. Now, next we've seen the halacha that if she has 4 servants, she sits on the couch, doesn't have to do anything. Versus Yitzchak bar Hanani said she doesn't have to do any work, but she should do the 3 tasks that a woman does for her husband as a sign of endearment, and that is pouring his cup of wine, making the bed for him. That's just spreading the blanket. That's not putting on the sheets. It's just making the blanket and the pillow. And the third thing is washing his hands and his face. So that means providing water for him to wash his hands and his face, drawing the bath, that is. So the Marcos of Yitzchak bar Chananya, and Rav Huna, that says all these 3 things are things that a nida should not do for her husband because they are a sign of endearment. We want to avoid that special sign of endearment during the nida period, lest it lead to trouble. So the Gemara quotes Rava, who says that there are permitted ways to make the bed, and that is if she does it not in front of him. If it's not in front of him, then it's not going to cause endearment. As far as pouring the cup of wine, the Gemara says Shmuel said that you can do it with the left hand. She would serve him with his left hand. Abaye had her put it on top of the jug, so it's in a different place than it's usually. Rava's wife put it on the pillow, and Rav Papa's wife put it on the stool. So they found ways to pour, but they did it in a way that showed there was a clear sign, and therefore that would keep them from coming to any mistakes. Now the Gemara goes on to talk about a need for food. So the Gemara says if somebody has a need for food, you shouldn't make him wait because it can cause problems. So the Gemara is going to speak about a servant, a waiter at a meal. When does he get the right to eat? When should you feed him? And when could you make him wait? So the Gemara says you're allowed to. The Gemara's first thing, Yitzchak bar Chanani says in the name of Huna, you're allowed to make him wait for all parts of the meal except for the meat and the wine, because that can cause him to become ill if he has to wait. Rav Chisda says fatty meat and old wine. Rava says fatty meat any time of the year, old wine only during the summer. That's where they have special draws. Ranan bar Tachlifa says I was standing in front of Shmuel and they brought me a dish made from mushrooms, and if they had not given me something to eat from it, I would have become ill. Rav Ashi says I was standing in front of Kahana and they brought sliced turnips in vinegar. If they would have not given me some of it, I would have become ill. Rav Papa says this applies even to a juicy zait. The general rule is anything which has a scent and juice, then it could cause illness, and you have to therefore share it with whoever is there. The Gemara says that the father, that Avua bar Ihi and Minyamin bar Ihi, one of them used to give the waiter part of every course. One of them would just fill them up a little at the beginning of the meal and then give them to partake at the end of the meal. So Eliyahu Navi spoke with the first one and did not speak with the second one because they were more difficult for the servant, for the waiter to handle. And where it says there are 2 Chasidim, 2 Tzadikim. Some say it was Rav Mari and Rav Pinchas, both sons of Rav Chisda. One would give them at the beginning of each course, one would give at the end of each course. Eliyahu spoke with the first one and not at the second one because he made the waiter wait. Now, the Gemara says that Amimar, Marzutra, and Ravashi were sitting at the gate of the palace of Isgor the king. And along came the person who brought him his food, brought the food for the king. And Ravashi saw that Marzutra's face turned white when he saw it. He became pale, which means that he was struck by a need to eat. So Ravashi stuck his finger in the food, took a fingerful of it, and put it on Marzutra's lips. Obviously, it wasn't kosher food, but he put it on in such a way that he wouldn't be violating the isser of eating it, but it would take off the craving. But the waiter wasn't too happy about it, and he said, you just ruined the king's meal. So he said, why did you do that? So he had to come up with a reason fast. So he said, whoever does things like this, meaning referring to the waiter, whoever makes this kind of food should be fired. No longer fitting to serve the king. He said, what are you talking about? He said, there's pig meat in there that has leprosy. It has teras. So they checked and they didn't find any such thing. So he pointed to a random spot on the meat and he said, check here. Did you check here? He didn't check here. They checked there and they found that there was teras there. So Gemara says, how could he do that? How could he obviously had a miracle happen to him. How could he rely on a miracle? So he said that he saw that teras came upon the face of Marzutra and they knew therefore there must be teras in the food. And then Gemara brings another story. There was a Roman who wanted a lady to marry him. He asked her. She said no. So he brought pomegranates, broke them open, and started eating them in front of her while she was watching and salivating. And her mouth was filling up with saliva so much that when she swallowed it, she bloated. She became ill. So he said, would you like me to heal you? If I heal you, will you marry me? So she said yes. So he went and brought more pomegranates, split them open, started eating them in front of him, and he told her, when you have saliva come in your mouth, spit and keep spitting. She kept spitting until this green thing came out, and then she was healed. And now we refer back to the Mishnah where we saw that a woman has to do work with wool. So Gemara says that implies only with wool, but not with flax. So this Mishnah fits with Rabbi Yehuda, because we learned a brisa that says a man cannot force his wife to serve his father or his son, or to give straw to his horse, but he can force her to give straw to his cattle. Rashi explains that the horses are more likely to cause inappropriate behavior, but the cattle are not. Rabbi Yehuda says he also cannot force her to work with flax because flax makes her have a smelly mouth and scratches the lips. Apparently she had to wet the flax when she worked with it, and that would cause effect on the mouth. So that's only with Roman cotton they have those issues, but other things you do not have the issues. Anyway, so there you see Rabbi Yehuda says she doesn't have to work with flax. So our Mishnah, who says she has to work with wool, fits with that. All right, now for back to the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer said that even if she brought in 100 shivchos, she still has to do some work because boredom brings to zima, brings to bad behavior. Somebody says Rav Malkiyo says the name Rav Adabar Ava, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. Now the Gemara is going to discuss that there is a Rav Malkiyo and there's a Rav Malkiya, and we have to avoid getting confused as to who said what. So the Gemara says the following three halachas are Rav Malkiyo: the halacha of the shipud, the shivcha, and the gumbas. Shipud means that a spit, it is a metal rod that was used to roast meat, that is muktzah on Shabbos because it is disgusting, but you're allowed to move it into the corner with your foot. Shevchos is our halacha, that even if she has 100 servants, she still has to do something. Gumos is that hair that grows as a sign of physical maturity has to come from well-defined pores. Now, anyway, that's all Rav Malkiyo. Then you have the three halachas of Rav Malkiya, which is the special clump of hair which the Akum use, they leave. You cannot leave a clump of hair like that, you have to leave a space. So Rav Malkiya tells you the halacha how much space you have to leave and not shave close to that area. Ash, you should not put ashes on a wound because it's going to cause a tattoo, and the Isra of Gvinas Akum. All these three are Rav Malkiya. Now, that's the approach, that's the Gemara's first approach, which is Rav Adabar Ava. The Gemara says that there's it's actually Rav Chanina Bar Vika. The Gemara calls Rav Papa has a different way of saying it. He says any which is from a Mishnah is Rav Malkiya. Anything which is from an Amora is Rav Malkiya. How do you know that? Because Malkiya is a queen. The Brisas and the Mishnayos are like queens, and therefore they are said by Rav Malkiya. Gemara says, what is the practical difference between the two? The difference is Shvachos, that's a Mishnah, but according to the first approach, it's Rav Malkiya. So therefore, that would be dispute who it is. Now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah for the last line. The Gemara says Shimon ben Gamliel has a disagreement with Rabbi Eliezer, but it sounds like they're both the same. Rabbi Eliezer said she should do something because Batola brings to Zima, brings to misbehavior. Shimon ben Gamliel said it brings to Shigaon, brings to Shiamam, it brings to boredom and drives people crazy. So the Gemara says what's the difference between the two? The Gemara says the difference is if she has something to do to occupy her, which is not functional. So if it's not functional, so it will bring her, it will not bring her lidei zima. It's not batola, but on the other hand, it's not useful engagement, and therefore it will bring to shigaon. So what are some things she might have to do? So a hobby would be like playing with small dogs or playing chess, which the Gemara calls nadrashir, and Rashi defines as chess based on the Targum. He calls it ishkakish, which the Targum clearly describes as chess. He says a board with 30 white pieces and 30 black pieces. We now get to our next Mishnah, which talks about the obligation that a man has to provide marital relations for his wife. And that's one of the obligations of the Kesuba. He cannot violate that. If he does something which makes it not possible, he has to divorce her and give her her Kesuba payment because he has violated it. So what would be a situation in which he can't provide it? That's if he makes a neder that he's not going to do it. Of course, he can't aser his wife to have hana from him because that would violate his obligation in the Kesuba, but he can aser himself to have hana from her. That doesn't go against the Kesuba, but that does make it aser for them to have tashmish, and therefore he has to set her free. Now, how long is the term of this iser that it's a violation? That's Machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says 2 weeks. Beis Hillel says 1 week is already a violation. He has to divorce her and give her Kesuba. Now, even though that's true, the Mishnah continues to describe that the chi of ona, the obligation, is to how frequently he has to be with her, changes from person to person based on their job. Talmidim are allowed to go away to learn a Torah for 30 days, even if their wife does not agree. Workers are allowed to go for only 1 week. Now, the Torah lists the obligations. So somebody who is a metayel, who's a person who takes walks all the time, the Gemara will discuss exactly what he has to do every day. Somebody who's a regular worker has to do twice a week. Someone who's a donkey driver, which means he's a peddler from town to sell wares, he has once a week. Somebody who drives camels goes further, he has to take 30 days. He has once in 30 days. And a sailor only has once in 6 months because they go away from home for long periods of time. The Mishnah says these are all the words of Rabbi Eliezer. And now begin the Gemara. The Gemara discusses what is the source of Machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says it's okay to go for 2 weeks with a ned. The Beis Shammai says it's okay to go 2 weeks, and Beis Hillel says it's only 1 week. So the Gemara says Beis Shammai learns out of the fact that somebody who gives birth to a girl is tamei automatically for 2 weeks. So therefore, you see there's a 2-week delay with no tashmish, and that's considered okay. So obviously, 2 weeks is not a violation. Now, what does Beis Hillel hold? So the Gemara first wants to say he learns from someone who gives birth to a boy only has 1 week. The Gemara rejects that because if you're learning from one who gives birth, then you should learn from one who gives birth to a girl. Why learn from one who gives birth to a boy? You do find the same thing. You find someone who gives birth to a girl. There is such a thing as a normal time having to wait that long. So Gemara says Beis Hillel therefore doesn't learn from birth. Beis Hillel learns from a regular nida period. The classic nida makes her tamei for 7 days. So therefore, the normal time to ignore, the normal time to miss tashmish is for 7 days. So now the Gemara says, what is their machlokas over? Machlokas over. What should we learn from? Should we learn from giving birth, or should we learn from regular nida? Nida is shchiach, it's common. So therefore, should we learn this? Should we learn from something that's common? Or should we learn from something that's caused by the husband? Nida is not caused by the husband. Birth is caused by the husband. So this neder, which is also caused by the husband, should maybe be learned from birth, and that is the opinion of Beis Shammai. The Gemara discusses what happens if he doesn't give a set time. He just asks her in Hana. So the Gemara says, according to Rav, so there's no limit, so he has to divorce her right away because there is no limit. It's for sure a violation. Shmuel says, no, go up to the time period. 1 week going to Beis Hillel, 2 weeks going to Beis Shammai, and then see. Maybe by then he'll find a Pesach, he'll find a way out of the neder, he'll be able to break it through a chacham. So Gemara says this machlokes is very similar to a different machlokes which we had between Rav and Shmuel. Why is it repeated here? That machlokes, the other one, is where a man makes a neder that his wife is not allowed to enjoy any part of his money. The problem is that he has to feed her. He's obligated to support her. So if he says the neder is limited to 30 days or less, so then he can hire somebody, he can take somebody to support her for that time. The Gemara there explains why that's not considered a violation of the neder because he's working as a shliach of the husband. But that's not our sugi here. Now, if it's longer than 30 days, then he has to divorce her. But the question there is what happens if he doesn't give a set time. So there, again, Rav says no set time, so that's considered like longer than 30 days, and he has to divorce her right away. Shmuel says, wait and see, maybe we'll get a Pesach to the neder. So Gemara says, why do you have to repeat the machlokas, the same machlokas we said over there? Gemara says, you need it because over there, at least there's the possibility of doing something. You can resolve it to some extent by getting somebody else to support her. Here, we're talking about tashmish. There's no replacement. There's no way around that, and therefore, it is far more likely that you would have to divorce her right away. Therefore, it's a chiddush in both cases that each one holds his opinion even in his case. Even in the case where there is a possibility of a parnes, Rav says divorce her right away. Even possibility where there's no possibility of a parnes, Shmuel says stay and wait.